There are spirits everywhere, watching, waiting, seeking that opportune time to reveal themselves like no other. They fill our worlds with so much.
Seriously? You didn't just do that. You farted on the promo? What's wrong with you? I thought you were a professional. Go away. Go. I got it. Hey everybody, it's Brian Bowden, host of Nobo Boomy, where we explore deep inside the Goblin universe. We have an amazing show that covers the paranormal, conspiracies, music, art, entertainment, trending topics, and so much more. Please join us by subscribing to the show on Podbean at InsideTheGoblinUniverse.podbean.com, on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and everywhere you find podcasts. It's an informative, fun, and overall entertaining good time, and we'll keep the gas to ourselves. Why don't you burp next time? Somebody get me Brian Anderson.
Welcome to Paranormal Heart, a place where people can talk about their paranormal experiences. With your host, Kat Ward, along with a special segment, Oddities with John Mallard.
Welcome back, folks, to Paranormal Heart, your paranormal podcast that you can now enjoy on the second Sunday and last Sunday of each month. As usual, you can find Boo and I on Podbean, YouTube, SparkRadioNet.work, iTunes, Spotify, and any other place you can find fine podcasts. Folks, you probably noticed that I've been giving shoutouts to various countries that have been listening to the show. I absolutely love seeing all the amazing places my listeners are from, and appreciate you all, and some of you also like knowing the amazing locations around the world, so I thought every episode I'd mention a country. So this month, I'd like to give a shout out to you listeners in India. Much love and respect to you all, and thanks so much for listening. I hope you've been enjoying my guest narrators on the last few episodes while John took a little break, and I'll be having them on again from time to time. Now, as promised, he's back this episode, so let's hear what weird and wonderful things John has for us with Oddities with John Mallard. Over to you, John.
Hey, folks, welcome to Oddities, strange facts about an odd world that are very, very, very true. I'm a guy who loves firsts. I really am. I love to be the first person in line. I love to be the first person a girl ever kisses. Well, not anymore because I'm married. I'd like to be the first to say I'm sorry for saying that before my wife gets mad, but that's beside the point. To this month's Oddities is all about, well, firsts. Famous firsts. Things that, well, came first. A few more fascinating firsts for you guys right now. Toothbrush. According to 17th century Chinese encyclopedia, the toothbrush was invented in China in 1498 and appears to have been on the same basic design as modern brushes. Toothbrush bristles were made from animal hair until 1938, when the first nylon bristle brushes were finally introduced. Radio broadcast. First radio broadcast was on Christmas Eve, 1906, in Brent Rock, Massachusetts. Professor Reginald Aubrey Feshnoff played "Oh Holy Night" on the violin. The broadcast was heard as far away as the West Indies. Parachuting. The first parachute jump from an aircraft was made by André Jacques Ganin on October 27, 1797. He jumped out of a balloon from a height of 2,230 feet and landed in a park in Paris. The ride was so bumpy that he also became the first person to get airsick. My God, you got to be a brave man to be the first ever person to, deploy a parachute. Woo! Frozen food. The first individually packaged frozen food products were created by Clarence Birdseye. They first appeared at grocery stores in Springfield, Massachusetts on March 6, 1930. Among the first products, frozen peas, frozen spinach, frozen raspberries, and frozen fish, all of which can be found in my freezer. Moving on. Elevator. The first passenger elevator was French, installed in King Louis XV's private rooms in the Palace of Versailles in 1743. The flying chair, as it was known, was actually on the outside of the building and it had no motor and went up and down with the assistance of a carefully balanced system of weights and pulleys. Interesting. Comics. Before there were comic books, there were comic strips. The first was The Yellow Kid, which appeared on Sundays in the New York Journal beginning October 24th, 1897. Daily comic strips started in 1904, and the first comic book was published in 1933. It was actually a collection of said strips. The Raincoat. First raincoat was made by an engineer from French Guinea, Francois Fresneau. He discovered rubber trees there in 1747 and used their sap to waterproof an old overcoat by smearing it on it. And, of course, something very odd indeed, the first ever human cannonball. This feat was first appeared at West Amphitheatre in London on April 2nd, 1877 by a performer, Zazelle, billed as a beautiful lady fired from a monstrous cannon. The cannon was actually powered by springs which gently shot her into a large safety net. So there you have it. Why be last when you can be first? For more strange firsts and oddities, make sure you check out the Odd the Newfoundland Paranormal podcast. Back to you, Kat.
Thanks so much, John. My next guest has been fascinated by the mystical and paranormal all of his life. He's a paranormal investigator, amateur ufologist, certified tarot card reader, hypnotist, Reiki master, and mystic. He is the author of several books, including An Angel Came Down. He's also the host of podcast The Spirit Side and co-host of People Under the Stairs. Please help me welcome Paul James Caiden. Hey, Paul, welcome to Paranormal Heart. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the show. I think we have a great topic for your listeners tonight.
So do I. And I just want to apologize to you and the listeners. As you can tell by my voice, I'm a little under the weather. The plague has hit my household. 'Tis the season, you know, school and everything, so not much you can do about it. So we just kind of move on. So where would you like to start?
Well, I'd like to start by saying at least thank your lucky stars it's not the stomach bug.
No kidding. I'll take a little congestion over that anytime.
Well, I guess with this story, you know, there's a series of books out there I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with called the 411 Missing Person Cases, which is written by David Pilates. Many people pronounce his names, and I'm not sure which the right pronunciation is.
I know, I've heard it pronounced so many different ways.
But it's a really interesting set of books talking about people disappearing in national forests and just out on hunting excursions. And, you know, one of the things I would kick off by telling your listeners, and I think I told this story in one of the podcasts we done with People Under the Stairs when we had a group of us. And I'd never heard anything of this nature before until years later. I mean, I'm 52 now, and I'm just now beginning to hear of people that had similar experiences and things that are coming out with these 411 cases. But I grew up in a town called Middletown, New York. And just probably about 5 miles outside of Middletown is a little hamlet called South Centerville, New York. And a lot of woods, you know, in that particular area. And back in the day, it's called the Minnesink area, all through, you know, this part of Orange County, because it was Native American land back in the day. And even if you look up online, the Orange County Fairgrounds in Middletown, New York, in Orange County, they say that there was a curse on the fairgrounds because every year when the fair would open in August, they would have 2 or 3 days where there were these torrential downpours of rain, and it would just like shut everything down. So people called it, you know, the Orange County Fair curse. So I don't know if this had anything to do with it or not, being Native American land, which, you know, I'm sure is a lot of Native Americans back in the day. The land was probably taken from them in not very nice terms.
Yeah.
But this was the summer of, I want to say 1981. There were a bunch of us kids that hung out. We, rode our bikes up and down the road. And you went down the road, and it was about a mile ride. Just the road and woods on either side, and there was this big rock on the side of the road, and so we called it the Big Rock. I'm going to ride my bike down to the Big Rock. And so, we're all hanging out at my one friend Dave's in his yard, one afternoon in the summer, and all the little kids come up, and they're like, guys, don't ride your bike down, down by the Big Rock at night. There's something in the woods, and we just completely ignored them. We're like, yeah, they're trying to, psych us out. Nobody even acknowledged what they were saying. Days later, they're still, don't ride your bike down there. There's something in the woods. And we're like, yeah, sure, whatever. And so long story short, me and a friend of mine are taking a walk one night, and there's a churchyard on Route 6 as you're going toward the Big Rock. It was called Holy Cross Church. It's still there, a Catholic church. And we're just about in front of the churchyard, and my friend stops and he says, what the hell is that? And he points across the road, and it was a kind of a dark, moonless night, and I look, and I see something that's blacker than the night, but I really can't make out what it is. But by this time, he's like running in the opposite direction, so I figured he saw something completely, horrendous, so I didn't bother to look anymore. I just took off after him. Now, fast forward to that, the next February, it's nighttime. I'm waiting for my friends. We all went shopping. All the parents and kids went shopping on Friday night. So my family was usually the first one back. I'm waiting for, some of my friends to get home with their parents. There's snow on the ground. It's crusty because there's ice, a layer of ice on top of the snow. And it must have been at least knee deep or higher. I mean, this is a deep snow because it snowed like all winter that year. And here I am down at the churchyard. You walk down this kind of driveway, I guess you would call it, to the parking lot. And then if you hung a right, you went around the church building, and then there was the parking lot. To the far left was the Sunday school building, and there was a street lamp right by the Sunday school building that lit up the parking lot. And I come around the side of the churchyard, and suddenly from out of the side of the Sunday school building steps this tall, black thing. And it wasn't a bear because bears were hibernating. It was cold. I'm out there walking around in like 25-degree weather at night. And I'm looking at this thing. It's right under the street light. And it must have been, I would say, 8 feet tall, maybe taller. If I was standing in front of this thing and I'm 5'11", I definitely would be looking up at it. And I just remember how wide its shoulders were, and you could see like the definition of the like chest muscles. I mean, for all intents and purposes, this thing looked like a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. And it tips its head back, and it's like sniffing the air like an animal picking up a scent. And I'm looking at this thing, and the thoughts that go through my head are, what does it smell? Does it smell me? And if it does, am I dinner? Is this thing going to come after me? So I back up. I walk backwards around to the front of the church. I turn around. I run like hell for home. And by this time, and again, fast forward, to get to the point of the story, everybody in the neighborhood is seeing things. They're hearing things. Even my father, one night, he comes home from walking the dog. And he wasn't a guy that wasn't afraid of ghosts or ghost stories or the paranormal. He didn't really think about that kind of thing. And he owned handguns. And after this particular night, he never went, walked the dog. We had a dog at that time. He never walked the dog again at night down that road without taking one of his handguns with him. because he said he got, again, just right by the churchyard, and there was, some woods by the church. And he said he heard something that sounded really big running through the woods. He could hear the footsteps thumping on the ground as this thing ran. And he didn't know if it was a bear. He didn't know what it was. But he heard the thing come out of the woods and hit the road, but he couldn't see anything. And he said the only thing he could think to do was like brace for impact, because something was about to collide with him or jump on him. And he said these footsteps got right next to him, and he was ready for this thing to like take him off his feet, whatever it was. And there was nothing. It was gone. It was completely silent. So for him to say that and, start carrying a gun, that makes, of course, the kids, we're 15 and younger, and makes us go, well, that's not good,
No.
So,
was his encounter right around the same time you had yours? Was it winter as well?
His encounter was, I believe it was the following spring, early spring. Mm-hmm. So maybe around March or April or early May. So it wasn't cold weather at that point.
Mm-hmm. The church at this time, was it still being used as a church? It was an abandoned building.
It was still being used. I mean, they still have services there to this day. It's an active church. There's a lot of weird tales around that churchyard. And where I lived, you talk about poltergeist energy, and they say they usually show up where there's kids 15 to 18, and there's a lot of angst. Mm-hmm. And the neighborhood where I lived, it was like the Amityville Horror. Everybody was seeing things and hearing things. And the neighborhood, as you get older and you find out what's going on there, I mean, we had a father with, his son and his daughter lived next door to us. That was our friends, Dave and Mary. And come to find out, Daddy and daughter Mary are having an incestual relationship.
Oh, wow.
My father was a drinker and verbally abusive. The guy across the road, our other friend's house, they were verbally abusive to one another. Mm-hmm. The guy on the other side, he was a drinker, and he beat his kids and his wife, which of course were some of our friends. So there was a lot of crazy stuff, and I don't know if this is what brought all this out in this neighborhood, but it was really bizarre. Some of the things that, grown-ups and kids alike were saying, what is this? There's like weird stuff everywhere. But fast forward with this story to the October of 1982. And me and my brother and my one friend Dave, we decide we're going to go hunting for this thing, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So, being, skilled, creature and Bigfoot hunters that we are, we arm ourselves with a baseball bat, a dagger, and a set of homemade nunchucks.
Oh, no.
So we're going to do, wonders with this if we run across this.
You're packing.
Yeah. So we go down to the big rock. There was a path that led up into a field and then into the woods. We went all around the woods by the big rock and around the, nothing. We started out probably about 10 in the morning. And, we were headed home about 12:30, 12:45. And we're walking home. We're on the road. And again, here we are just, maybe about a half a football field's length from the church. And there's an embankment, there's a field, and some other like sparse woods, at the edge of the field. And most of the leaves, you could see into the woods. They weren't that heavy at the edge of the field. And a lot of the leaves were coming off the trees at that particular time. So as we're walking, we hear this noise coming from the trees on, the edge of the field where we're walking. So we stop and we're like, what is that? And I swear to God and everything I hold dear and holy and precious in life, this thing sounded like a roaring lion coming from the trees across the field toward us. But we couldn't see anything. And before we know it, we hear this roaring right in front of us over the embankment. And I remember looking up, and my brother had like this look of sheer horror on his face. And he goes, I don't know what the hell that thing is, but it's invisible. We can't see it.
Oh, wow.
And again, we just all took off running because, you know, you could hear this thing, the distance coming across till it's right in front of us. And it's like, roar! I'm like, what the hell is that, you know? And that was my experience of encountering something that I couldn't see. And I never heard anybody tell a story like that in my life until doing podcasting and, you know, doing YouTube. I met a gentleman by the name of Kevin Town who lives in Jamestown, New York. And he told a story on his YouTube channel that back in the early mid-'80s when he was younger, he was homeless for a time and he lived in a tent. And around the woods where he was living in his tent, there were some things that were attacking like horses and cows in the field. You know, some of them were being injured, like they were being tore, but nobody knew what it was. And he went to town one day to see his girlfriend, and then, you know, it was probably, he said it was summertime, probably about 3, 4 in the afternoon. He came back home to his tent. He's walking down this country road, you know, about to, you know, turn into the woods and go back to his tent. And he said he heard something coming through the woods, you know, snapping twigs, very, very heavy, you know, heavy-footed. And he said he heard this thing, the heavy footsteps come out of the woods and stomping right across the road in front of him to the woods on the other side of the road. Entered the woods, and again, you know, the leaves are rustling, the twigs are snapping, but he saw absolutely nothing, you know. And I remember him saying that, you know, I don't know what it was, guys, but this thing passed right in front of me, and I couldn't see it, you know.
It sounds like something right out of that TV show Supernatural. Good grief.
Yeah, and it was at that moment that I said, hey, I got to contact this guy, because I used to watch his YouTube channel because he would talk about paranormal. Mm-hmm. And I ended up, when I started podcasting, I asked him to come on the show. We became friends. And yeah, he's got a lot of stories that definitely very similar. But that was the second story I've ever heard of someone saying that there was something that they couldn't see walking right in front of them. And, you know, when you get into the 411 cases, how do we know, as some people say, that there isn't some kind of invisible predator out there? Mm-hmm. You know, if we can't see it coming up on us, then of course we have no defense. You know, and there was another story that I watched, and I don't remember the guy's YouTube channel, but this was about a year ago that Kevin had told me about it, because he's really into camping and bushcraft, and he watches a lot of YouTube channels with people that do that sort of thing. Mm. And there was one guy that he watches, and he doesn't talk about the paranormal. He does bushcraft and camping. And he said he had mentioned on his channel that he saw something weird one time. And of course, his viewers said, what is it? What is it? And of course, when he told the story, Kevin shared the link with me and people on his YouTube channel. But there was a gentleman who was camping in, let me find the name of this mountain range he was at. It was, did I write it down? St. John's Mountain in the state of Georgia. He said this guy on his channel said those are the first and last time he ever camped there. He went during the day, he set up his camp, And he said when nighttime came, he just had an uneasy feeling the whole time, even during the day when he was setting up his camp. And he didn't pay attention to it because he almost felt like something or someone was watching him. But he's like, it's just my imagination. There's nobody here. And when nighttime came, he said there was a full moon. And, it was casting that, bright kind of glow across the woods and, his campsite. And, he said he was laying on his back with his feet in his tent. And, the upper half of his body sticking out. He was like looking at the moon and the trees and stars. And he said all of a sudden, the crickets, all noises of nature just completely stopped.
That's never a good sign.
Yeah. And he said, well, that's weird, and he hears something coming through the woods. So he sits up, he's wondering, is it a bear? Is it a person? What's coming through the woods? And again, it sounds rather large. And he says there's a tree at the edge of his camp, and something jumps on the tree that he could physically see the tree shaking and moving. And then it was like whatever it was jumped from that tree to another tree next to it, and that tree is moving. And he said that whatever it was, there was something in the tree, and it jumped from one tree to the other, but he couldn't see it. And he said at that point, he grabbed what he could carry, and he left all of his camping gear, some of it, quite expensive, and he just took off down the trail, toward his car, and in the middle of the night. And he said he never went back to get his stuff. He said he would never go to John's Mountain again. But he said he was probably about halfway down the trail, and he heard something on the trail behind him, and he was getting panicked, like this thing is in pursuit. What the hell is it? And he said he finally got about halfway down the trail, and suddenly it was like somebody flicked a switch, and all the sounds of the crickets in nature just started again. And then he felt when that happened that whatever it was must have been gone. So he was a little bit relieved, but he definitely hightailed it to his vehicle and, took off, never went back. And that's the only paranormal or weird story that guy ever shared on his channel, because people asked him, hey, what was this weird thing that you saw?
Yeah.
And, so again, we have invisible something, but what the hell are they?
I've heard some people speculate that because at this point it's only speculation because you can't really prove or disprove, but I've heard some people say that when you can't hear the wildlife like that, that they believe that you are actually in another location, almost like in a different dimension or something. You can still see your world, but you're not fully in that world, and that's why you can't hear the crickets and everything like that. And then once that goes away, then you're back fully into your own plane. But I've only heard a few people say things like that. Have you ever heard that?
I have heard people say that maybe these things, either everything in nature knows that there's something not nice around, so it's just quiet, or temporarily, they are changing the dynamics of our dimension somehow, that we're not really where we think we are.
I wonder if it would be interesting to find out in cases like that if anyone has a compass with them, and if the compass is just spinning, or if it's just normal. It would be really interesting to find out. But I guess under circumstances like that, that's the last thing you're going to think about is grab your compass.
Yeah, well, here's one that maybe you've heard about. And I've heard the rumors circulating on the internet, about this woman who was on a hunting expedition, and she was up in the trees, hunting deer. In a deer stand, she had a crossbow. It was, bow season. And she saw something as the man in John's mountain range in Georgia, jumping from tree to tree. And it was said that it looked like something that was made out of saran wrap that you could see through.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You could see it, but you couldn't see it. And also described as the Predator in stealth mode out of the Predator movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now what I didn't know, because I thought, now, is that true, or is that just one of these, rain brain internet stories that, somebody's putting out there? But what I didn't know until I saw the documentary 411 The Hunted is that this was the wife of a gentleman by the name of Bruce Maccabee. And Bruce Maccabee is a no-nonsense guy who was in a lot of UFO documentaries. He was the specialist that people took their photos and their video footage to say, is this authentic? Is it doctored? And he disproved a lot of them. When you saw Bruce Maccabee, you had maybe a 1 in 10 shot that he was going, oh yeah, I can't explain this one, because a lot of it he was like, I don't know about this. But this was his wife.
Oh wow!
That she was out hunting, because she hunts, and she said she was in her deer stand with her crossbow, and she heard something, and she looked up, and she saw that not far from her this predator type thing going, tree to tree. And the interesting thing that she said is that while she was watching this thing, she was almost in a hypnotic state, like she was transfixed by it. Almost like it was, her consciousness was being altered somehow. Mm-hmm. And she got the idea, because she had her cell phone with her, or a camera, or whatever it was. She said, I got to try to get a picture of this. And she took it out. She snapped a picture, and when she got it home and told her husband Bruce what had happened, something fudged up the camera, just by being in his presence. And so yeah, that turned out to be a true story. That's definitely kind of creepy.
That's interesting. I wonder, do you know? What did you say she took out? Was it a camera or a phone?
I don't remember which one it was, whether it was a cell phone or whether it was just a camera that she had to take pictures of. If she got, bagged a buck or something. I don't remember what it was, but, if you watch 411 The Hunted, they have her story in there, and her husband saying, what happened to the camera, that was very strange, when she tried to snap a picture of this thing. Mm-hmm. And again, this isn't a guy that has ever gone down for hoaxes or nonsense. So when I found out, he was involved, it was his wife, I was like, all right, I'm more apt to believe there's something here that, it's creepy. It's damn creepy.
Oh, yeah. It's bad enough seeing creatures that are, that big, but hearing them and feeling them and not being able to see them, yeah, no thanks.
Yeah, I was just talking to my wife, before we did the show, and I said, when we're kids, most of us are afraid of the dark. We don't want to go somewhere that's unfamiliar, the wide open spaces, the woods at night. And our parents tell us, oh, it's all your imagination. There's no such thing as monsters. There's nothing out there. Mm-hmm. And now that we're older, and people like you and I that look into this kind of thing, we're like, bullshit, there's something out there.
Right?
So, yeah.
Like my experience when I was a child with the Hat Man, and that I used to tell my parents, it was the man in the closet. And one time my father, it was a big walk-in closet that I had, and my father took me there to say, there's nothing here at night that isn't here in the daytime. And you probably heard me say this before. I just looked at him and I said, you mean he's here in the daytime too? He was trying to console me, but, comfort me, to reassure me. But the way that I was thinking, of course, it's like, no, it kind of backfired on him, and he kind of regretted saying that. But, yeah.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like a lot of other things. They say kids are much more in tune with, you know, with God, with spirit, with, you know, things that we don't necessarily see or grown-ups take for granted. And so maybe that fear of the dark or the unknown, maybe there's something to it, and society kind of bleaches that good sense out of us where, you know, we're wandering out places where we're getting, as we say, 411. You know?
Yeah, this, like I say, my spidey senses tingle whenever there's something around.
It is, and now here's one I wanted to share with you, and I don't know if you ever heard of this or not. The Dyatlov Pass incident. Have you ever heard of this?
No. What's the what pass?
All right, for you or, you know, any of your listeners who want to look this up, the spelling is Dyatlov Pass. So it's Dyatlov Pass incident.
Oh, I've never heard of it. Or maybe I have, and I didn't know what it was called.
Yeah, this was creepy. This was 9 Russian hikers, experienced hikers, who died very mysteriously in the northern Ural Mountains between February 1st and 2nd in 1959. Now, what had happened is that there was a group of them, if I remember correctly, they were going on a trip somewhere. They took a train. They got lodging. The next day they set off to hike over this mountain range, which, you know, they were going to go into the next town and then call their, you know, girlfriends, family, or whatever people were going to come and meet them that weren't hikers. And the one, they said they were going to contact, you know, their loved ones once they got so far into the, you know, out of the mountains the next day or whatever, but nobody ever heard from them. So they sent out a search party, and now what happened when they found these guys and girls, 9 of them, something had frightened them so badly, obviously in the middle of the night. These people, 9 experienced hikers, cut themselves out of their tent with knives from the inside out, fled into the night wearing just their underwear. No
yes, I have heard of this. Yes.
Yeah. And their bodies were found not far from the campsite, very mysteriously. You know, one person, they said he was exposed to a great amount of weight because he was just crushed. You know, another person was crushed. His tongue was missing. His eyes were missing. You know, it was, I mean, you could see pictures of the bodies, you know, in the snow. But, you know, I find that story to be, you know, and there was actually a photograph, and nobody knows what the photograph was. Was it one of the people? Was it whatever or whoever frightened them out of their tent? But there's like a shape, kind of a human or humanoid shape, kind of standing by some trees, and nobody really knows who or what it is. But very, very peculiar circumstances. But if it was a person, I mean, there's 9 of them. Why would they?
Yeah.
Why would they be so frightened that they would pull out knives, you know, half naked, you know, and, you know, just rip into the tent and flee into the night, you know, and like winter conditions? That makes absolutely no sense.
I've heard some people say that they were probably under the influence of some kind of a chemical, but how would they know for sure? Did anyone do any autopsies, I'm thinking?
I think they did, and that's the only thing they came out with, is they don't know what happened because of the, you know, being massively crushed or whatever the case may be. But I've never heard any autopsy or results coming back where they said, well, they were taking drugs or whatever.
And even if they did, how do you explain the crushing?
Yeah, and the tongue missing, and the ear, and the eyes, and, you know, all that kind of good stuff. So
I don't recall if that. So they had no speculations at all as to what it could have been.
No, you know, I mean, there's speculations, but the whole thing is still to this day just uncertain and mysterious. They don't really know what happened to those people.
Wow. I remember when I first heard that a few years ago. It was a story that just blew my mind. It's very fascinating, but wow, those poor people.
Yeah, that's. I think about that once in a while. That incident, when I think about the 411 and these odd things that take people, and I'm like, man, just the level of fear you could only imagine being there, being one of these people or with them, where there's something that's so frightening that you just, you're just cutting the side of the tent and running out, in your underwear and socks, into, shin deep snow, in the middle of a mountain pass that's freezing cold. You got to be pretty scared. There's got to be some serious fright going on right there.
No kidding. It would be interesting to find out if they also, what you mentioned earlier about hearing creatures but not seeing them. Now, I know you said there was a photo that they weren't quite sure what it was, but it would be interesting to find out. Oh, so many questions.
Yeah, and it makes me think about, my own experience with, back in 1981, 82, where there's so many of us seeing this big, black, Bigfoot-looking thing hanging around, this small neighborhood. And then there's something, coming across the field that's growling when we're like hunting for it with our very feeble weapons.
Yeah.
So, these things we call Bigfoot and Sasquatch, is that why nobody's ever captured one or shot one or found one in the woods? Because did they have that ability that they could be there and then they could camouflage themselves or become invisible out of our spectrum of light where we can't see them,
Yeah. I was just thinking that. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely makes me think. Yeah. So I think there's more to that than meets the eye or does not meet the eye. But
agreed. Yeah.
I think if that's the case, it would depend. I would think whether you're attacked or taken. If that's what's actually doing it. Because when I look back, whatever that was in the churchyard, the church parking lot, that thing could have easily, with my backing up and turning around and running, it could have easily, with the stride this thing must have had and probably the speed, it could have overtaken me easily and dragged me into the woods of South Centerville, and I never would have been seen again. I would have been a 411 cat. Yeah, before 411 was invented.
Yeah, sounds like it just wanted to get rid of you.
Yeah,
and just like not get rid of it as in doing away with you, but just they wanted you to leave the area for whatever reason.
Yeah, and the growling kind of like scaring us off. I mean, there it was right in front of us. If whatever that was could have physically touched us, again, it could have easily come up over that small little embankment and just slaughtered us all over the road or whatever it was going to do.
Yeah.
But again, it didn't. So, if that's what's at least responsible for some of these 411, is it like anything else? Some of them are very aggressive and some of them are not, and we just happen to be lucky that it was not.
I sometimes think you and I are the same age. Do you remember the TV show $6 Million Man?
I do.
Yes. I used to love that show. You remember when he found Sasquatch in the hills?
I do. And
it was an alien.
Yeah, and I was going to make reference to that, but I didn't know if you or your viewers would have known the show, because the thing that I saw looked a lot like, Andre the Giant playing Sasquatch in $6 Million Man. Only it was much more defined. I think I would have to say the fur, the hair on this thing looked probably a bit shorter than portrayed in the $6 Million Man, because you could really see, this muscle definition in the shoulders and the chest. It was like bodybuilder ape man. I mean, this thing was huge in every sense of the word.
Yeah, I actually think about that show a lot whenever I hear people speak about Sasquatch. And because some people believe that it is an alien, and it just makes me wonder if the reason why we can't find him is maybe they're using technology to cloak themselves somehow. Or maybe it's an innate ability that they have. Who really knows?
Well, there's a lot of Bigfoot sightings and, big hairy man, ape being sightings. Whenever there's a big flap of UFOs and lights in the sky somewhere, these things show up. So I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to say, I think they're related somehow.
There's some kind of correlation.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I've heard people as well, researchers say that when there's Bigfoot sightings, there's lots of orbs that are sighted in that area as well. And some people speculate that the orbs are them. How can I word this? It's like they're flashing into our reality. But again, who knows? So many speculations.
That is so funny that you mentioned that, because here we are at the churchyard again. Maybe this is maybe 1983, and all of us in the neighborhood, that were 14, 15, younger, we all used to get together and play this game called The Hunt and the Hunted. And it was kind of like I don't know why we made this game up, but we would break off into teams. And some of us would go and hide, and the others would have to search for them. But it was like this Green Beret thing, there was all this hiding, or hiding yourself in weeds with camouflaging yourself, and you had to make believe to get out and kill the person before they found you. So it was it was like hide and seek with a hint of Green Beret, I guess. But, We're all down at the churchyard one night playing the Hunt and the Hunted, and it was my brother, another friend of ours whose name was Paul, and one of the younger kids named Kevin, and they went into the woods, and again, this was kind of right by the side of the Sunday school building where this thing had stepped out years earlier, and there was a little clearing in there, and they said they were huddled in there, waiting to see if anybody would pass by that they could, come out and play kill. And my brother said that he saw this orange orb coming through the woods. And he said it was just kind of bobbing along, like it's almost walking. He's like, what the heck is that? And, he sees this thing. It comes out of the woods into the clearing. It's just kind of floating along. And he points at it, and says, to my friend Paul, which was incidentally the same one that saw the big black shape across the road and took off running when I was with him. Mm-hmm. But he pokes my friend. He points at it. He says, what the hell is that? And they all saw it. Kevin, my brother, Paul, they all saw it. This orb. It's coming and it stops, like it's conscious. It didn't know they were there, and they were like, "What is that?" And it just stops.
Like, crap, they know I'm here.
Yeah, and they said it took a sudden turn, to the right, very fast, sped toward a tree, hit the tree, and exploded in flames.
Wow!
So, they talk about orbs and Bigfoots. That's a very very interesting story. And again, we were all looking for them, and they come running out of the woods. Let's get the hell out of here. Was always get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
But I remember that night we all went back to my house. We were sitting on the front yard, all the kids in a circle, and because I remember my mother looking out, and she's like, "What are you guys doing? All sitting in a circle in the front yard?" And we're like, we're just talking about weird shit, man, because we saw something at the church. But yeah, that was very odd. You know, and I actually didn't know that about the orbs and Bigfoot. So there you go.
Yeah, I've only heard about that the past few years. Some friends of mine, researchers, Alfred Santariga and Brian Bowden of, I can't remember the name of their organization now. Anyways, they've, Bronxville Paranormal. They have gone to a place called Nuclear Lake several times, and they say they've encountered Bigfoot and orbs quite a few times. And they think that there definitely is a correlation with Bigfoot, orbs, and UFOs.
Well, I definitely think they're right. You know, I knew about the UFOs, but now, hey, here comes the orb story. So
yeah, and
that's really weird.
That's what I like about podcasts for topics like this, is because even if you hadn't heard about it before, but you've experienced it and you listen to shows like this, then you're like, oh, wow, you know, somebody else has experienced this. And it might open doors for more people to do research. It would be great if somebody could get funded to do research, but who knows?
It would. It definitely would. And it makes you think, too, when I was looking, you know, writing down stories, you know, personal stories and stories that I've heard for this podcast. One of the things I came across talking about the 411 and invisible predators in the woods was, you know, the various creatures of lore, you know, that did the same thing, like the fae folk, the sprites, the gnomes, green men, the jinn. I actually have a book entitled "UFOs in the Quran."
Oh, really?
And, I'm fascinated by things like that: UFOs in the Bible, UFOs in the Quran. And you know, the book talks about you know, some of the recent UFO sightings or popular UFO sightings in you know, in ufology. But then it goes on to talk about even in the days of like Muhammad and the early Islamic community, there was this talk of the jinn who, you know, would take people, and sometimes they would bring them back, and sometimes they would not, you know, and they would just disappear, you know, much like the alien abductions, 411, the fae folk, you know. And again, these were generally would appear to people as the orbs, you know, the lights in the forest that would lead people out into the middle of nowhere and then kind of gotcha type of thing. And sometimes they would bring them back, and sometimes they wouldn't. So that's pretty creepy stuff.
No kidding. My friend Steve Stockton from 13 Past Midnight, you know Steve. When he was a child, he had an encounter with an invisible something, and he found out later on that it sounded like it was some kind of a water elemental, like a sprite or something.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, the stories you hear. I remember my grandfather telling a story once, because my grandparents were the original, you know, they were hill people. I mean, these people literally lived in cabins in the woods at one point in their lives. They were like mountain folk. And my grandfather, he said when he was growing up, you know, he spent a lot of time in the woods, as well as his brothers. And I just remember this story that he told a lot over the years. He said one time he was walking in the woods, you know, roundabout by his house. And he said he saw this bird in the distance. And he said it was the weirdest looking thing. He couldn't really make it out because it was far enough away, but he could see that it was quite tall, you know, almost as tall as he was. And he said this thing was, you know, in the woods, you know, by a group of trees, you know, ahead, just kind of like looking at him. And he said it started like jumping up and down, and then it turned and walked into the woods and started trying to get a closer look. He keeps following this thing. And he said it would walk, you know, so many feet, turn, and it would like jump up and down and then turn and you know. And he said he followed it into the woods, like, you know, what kind of bird is this? What the heck is it? And he said it, you know, the woods broke out into this kind of a swamp area, you know, with the stumps and the green water, with the, you know, murky moss or whatever growing on it, the algae. And he said this thing was by the edge of the swamp, that he was coming out of the woods. It turned, it looked at him, and again, it was kind of hopping up and down. And he said he was all of a sudden overcome with this overwhelming feel of dread that just told him, turn around and get out of here. Because if you walk out of these woods to get a closer look at this thing, at the edge of the water, it's going to kill you. You're not going to make it back home. And he said he turned and took off, ran into the woods. Didn't stop till he got home. But talk about everybody having encounters with bizarre things in the woods, or leading them out into the woods to try to, nab them for whatever reason.
Yeah. One story that fascinated me was a few years ago, and not that long ago, this young boy went missing in the States. I can't even remember how old he was, just very, very single digits. And when they found him, I think it was the next day, they found him nowhere near where he should have been, safe and sound, and it would have been too cold for him to be out in what he was wearing. And he said it was okay. The big monkey protected him.
I heard that story.
Yeah.
Where was that?
Oh, it was in the States, and I can't remember where.
Yeah, was he by a river when he disappeared?
Oh, I can't remember.
Yeah, I remember hearing a story about the big monkey.
Yeah. I mean, that's fascinating. You hear so many negative experiences with Bigfoot, but then you'll hear something like that about children where they're actually being taken care of.
Yeah, I think there's a Native American lore about the Bigfoot where they talked about these very big ape-like, kind of race that lived underground, and that they were very wise and that they could speak, and that they actually taught some of the Native American tribes different things about the earth and the woods and the elements and, whatever it is they shared with them. Mm-hmm. But I guess as man, particularly the white man, came and things got more and more civilized, if you want to call it that. They actually went underground, and they don't make themselves known anymore, at least not very much.
I wonder if those are the same things that where they say there's underground cities, but not like with big buildings or anything like that. I wonder if they're talking about these creatures that have gone underground.
Yeah, they had that thing last summer where they said that, I forget where in the world it was, but they said there was these gigantic land masses underneath the ground. And they just discovered another one in Antarctica just like a handful of weeks ago. Mm. They said it was like the biggest, canyon, like bigger than the Grand Canyon, under the ice and, in Antarctica. So who knows if there's, somebody or something that is down there, a whole other world that we don't even know about.
Yeah. Journey to the center of the earth.
Yeah, because one of the things I didn't know is that, when we talk about the earth, there's the crust, there's this, there's that, and then you get down to the core. It's one of those things that scientifically we say, yeah, this pretty much looks, the way that it is, but we really don't know for sure. I didn't know that. That scientists are still sending sound waves and all kind of things, through the earth to see, is it solid, is it fluid, what's down there. We really don't know. If you were to do like the journey of the center of the earth and get in some kind of vehicle with a big drill at the tip and start burrowing down, who knows what you would hit, eventually.
And who knows what's under the ice, at the poles. There could have been civilizations.
It could. It definitely could. And, who knows if it's not still there. The one thing that I always found interesting being a person that likes to look into the paranormal and the spiritual, looking into a lot of different prophecies from different religions, Native American, Christian, Islamic. And there's this Islamic prophecy. There's actually two of them that I find kind of eerie. And in lieu of some of the things we've been talking about and have been recently discovered with what looks like, giant mountain ranges and land masses and canyons, under the earth and under the ice. But there's an Islamic prophecy that says in the last days, there will be a great hairy beast that will rise up out of the earth, and he will go forth throughout the earth and cause, havoc. And of course, if you're, if you're a believer, you'll be okay. But if not, he may kill you or take you. But it also talks about a race of beings that are held back from the rest of the world by a great wall. How could that be a great wall of ice? Because they say eventually that great wall comes down, and these things converge on us, like a pack of ravenous wolves, and it's not pretty.
No, it wouldn't.
So that those two things I find very interesting. Again, when you think about these underground masses and canyons and creatures and Bigfoot and who knows what else is out there. I mean, were some of these people were there seers in the past that tapped into something, psychics that one day we're going to experience and hope we didn't.
Yeah. I was listening to the Mallard Report. I listen to it every week, but he had this guest on there. His name escapes me right now. And actually, he believes the Earth is flat, and he's also written a book. And I don't believe the same things he does, but I wanted to hear what he had to say because I want to know more about why do they believe this. And he was also saying that the reason why no one can go down to the South Pole is because we're not meant to, because there's a big wall there, and we're not meant to know what's on the other side. If I'm paraphrasing correctly.
Yeah, I've heard that too, and I'm not so sure about the flat earthers. I mean, if that's what people believe, that's fine. I myself don't believe it, but either way, suppose that's the wall that's holding something back that we shouldn't know about and we don't want to know about.
Mm-hmm. So many fascinating things out in the world that we still don't know.
There are, and then you have the alien abductions and the cattle mutilations, and there's even been a handful of people mutilations found, much like the cows, with no blood in the body, and these perfectly laser drilled holes with organs missing.
Yeah.
So man, it's
sure sounds like someone's doing research or something that we do whenever we go out and tag wildlife because we're studying them.
It is, and another one. I mean, not to not turning your show into a religious show, but just interesting correlations that I've seen over the years that make me sit back and go, wow, that's interesting. And like I said, did somebody know something or tap into something or see something clairvoyantly that would one day happen in our world? There's also this prophecy in the Christian tradition, and I'm sure many people have heard about the Nephilim, the sons of God that came down and mated with human women, and they had these hybrid offsprings. And there's books like the Book of Enoch that said that these fallen beings or beings that came down polluted all things on the earth, even the beasts of the field. They created these hideous chimeras that could have been as some speculate, the some of the creatures and monsters of Greek mythology.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the words of Jesus when he said, in the days of Noah, so shall it be before the Son of Man comes. And a lot of scholars look at that and say, one big thing we're missing about how it was in the days of Noah is that these things were supposedly on the earth. So are we looking at some kind of interdimensional, alien invasion where they were here once and they're coming back again, and they're going to make a pretty good mess of things here on planet Earth.
That's interesting too. I was just telling some friends the other day. We were talking about the Space Force, and how all of a sudden there seems to be all these discoveries out in space, strange sounds that they call short bursts. Short radio bursts, I can't remember what they're called, that they found in 2 separate locations, and they're not quite sure what those sounds are. Not saying that it is alien, because it could be anything out there that's going to be sending back a signal, but even something natural. But it's just very, very interesting how all of a sudden space seems to be active.
It is. It definitely is. There's all kind of anomalies and sounds, and things that are whizzing by the Earth all the time, and we don't know where they came from. It's it does make a body wonder. Did something. Because you look at all the traditions, like even the Mayans and the Native Americans and different tribes, the early Sumerians. I mean, they all have these legends of someone that was here, the gods, and that one day they're going to return, and when you read a lot of these accounts of the gods, it's all very similar, how they taught men certain things, they intermingled with human beings and created, strange half alien or half god, half human beings. And is that what we're looking at in the future? The Anunnaki and what many others call them. Mm-hmm. Are we gonna be in for? I don't know if it's a pleasant surprise or not, but I guess if it happens, we'll find out.
Let's hope it's not going to be an incident like that old science fiction movie where the aliens came down and they had this book and it says How to Serve Man. It was actually a cookbook.
Yeah, wasn't that The Simpsons?
Well, yeah, it was from The Simpsons too, but it was an old science fiction movie I remember watching.
Right.
Where they were bringing humans with them back on their ship, and they're thinking, "Oh well, they're going to worship us." No, and after they leave, someone's like, "No, we finally broke the code to see their language or whatever," and it's like it's a cookbook.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. I think a lot of these old civilizations, if what they're writing has any basis in reality, and the whole UFO alien phenomenon, these things usually showed up right before there was the whole collapse of entire civilizations were just gone. So obviously they're not good news. when they show up.
Or some people say that they know something bad's gonna happen on the planet. They're bringing back humans with them, and when it settles down, then they bring them back to resettle the planet. But who knows?
Yeah, there is that theory that they're not here to hurt anyone, but they're here to take certain people and, as you said, bring them back to rebuild afterwards.
Yeah. So many questions, so few answers.
Yeah, but I think when you look at all the mutilations and all the creepy stuff that's out there, and I think, at least in my opinion right now, I think we're more to be looking at something, how to serve man on the menu rather than help them out.
Yeah. Or there could be more than one reason why they're here. One of them is for that, and the other one just to study, and who knows.
Could be. Very well could be.
Do you believe an hour has gone by?
Well, I do believe it has. We are at 1 hour, 5 minutes, 12 seconds.
Oh, wow.
To be exact.
I was just thinking roughly an hour. I didn't actually pay attention to the time.
I just punched it up on Skype here. So.
Oh, I never thought, you're brilliant. Never thought of doing that. Well, before we go, why don't you tell us a little bit about your shows and where people can find you?
Well, as I say every week on People Under the Stairs, you could contact me through email at nocturnalmagic@gmail.com to ask any questions or even be a guest on my show, The Spirit Side, which, I talk about spirituality. I talk about the paranormal. Sometimes I kind of marry them together, like, the aliens and the prophecies and these weird things that are happening. Mm-hmm. I'm a wide scale speculator, but yeah, I have my other show, The Spirit Side, which is on all the podcasting platforms. I'm also with our good buddy Stan with People Under the Stairs, once a week show, and I started another podcast called the Rancha Podcast, which is kind of more of a spiritual show, just something to put some positive vibes out there because. There's an awful lot of darkness, an awful lot of conspiracy theory, and we sit around a lot going, wow, what's all this creepy stuff? I think sometimes people need a little bit of hope and light because there's too much perseverating, I think, on the ugly and the scary. But that's where you can find me, or, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. I'm not on Instagram because I find that to be, as I always say, the most worthless social media platform on the face of the earth. But just Paul James Caiden, or The Spirit Side, Paul James Caiden. If you Google me, I pop up every which direction. I'm everywhere. I'm Big Brother.
Can't get rid of you. I'll also have links on the show notes when this episode is released as well, so it'll be easier for the listeners to find you.
There we go. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. I enjoyed this, and I hope to have you on again at some point.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. I hope your listening audience liked the show, and if they didn't, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, thanks so much, and you take care.
You too.
Well, we've made it to the end of another episode. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, take care of each other. And if you'd like to be on the show or have questions and comments, just drop me an email, paranormalheart13@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you.
Paranormal Heart would like to extend a special thank you to PurplePlanet.com for supplying the music for the show. The views and opinions expressed on Paranormal Heart are those of the host and participants.